Well, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. This is Torah study for Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein in Valley Beshalom in Encino, California, joined by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of West LA. Good morning, Sherry. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Feinstein.
Nice to see you. I hope that you're doing well and all of your many children are thriving this week.
You would think I have 13 children the way you say that. I only have 5.
Yeah, but sometimes, in any case, when I was a kid, when I was young, back in the last century, Yontif came. It meant dressing up in new clothes, getting up very early in the morning. My dad would come into my bedroom early in the morning on Rosh Hashanah, roust me out of bed, right? Having a quick bite of something, and then we would walk the 1.5 miles to where the synagogue was meeting. We used to meet for high holidays in a giant Mormon stake center. And then he'd get me there, and it was Dad and me and 8 Hungarian men. And I'd listen, and I turned to my dad, is like, why do you wake me up so early? He's asleep already. Because even in my family, and my family wasn't that religious in that sense, very Jewish, of course, but not shul religious. They were Zionists and they were socialists and they were those kind of Jews. But even for them, Yontif was Yontif. The high holidays were sacred and you spent them in synagogue. And I spent many hours of my youth sitting in that synagogue, listening to the cantor and the choir and the rabbi and going through the service. And many of those, as I got older and got to be sort of a rebellious teenager, wondering like, what am I doing here? I think things have changed. Maybe you can tell me, because you're more in touch with younger families. It seems to me that families have choices now about how to spend these holidays.
It wasn't a choice. I grew up like you, Eddie, and not only was it expected, but there was a shopping thing beforehand about what we were going to wear. And then we would get to the holidays and it was wall to wall people, and the halls were filled with kids and teenagers playing cards and, cards. That's what we used to do. And there was a real experience there, but it wasn't a negotiable. Can I go? Do I have to go? It was a non-negotiable. And now families, it's not just, oh, I have to go because of guilt, or I have to go. It's like, I don't have to go. I can go to synagogue. I can go online. I can go on a walk through the wilderness. I can go to a park. I can have a meal. Like, all of those are in the cauldron. That's not a good word, but all of those are in the group of celebrating or recognizing the high holidays. And so people are not pulled to synagogue like they once were.
So take a moment. So during COVID, we moved all of our synagogues online. And I have to tell you that it was a marvelous experience. There's a wonderful gentleman in our community who happens to do television for a living, and he became our director. And we put up some lovely services. In fact, people were embarrassed to come to me and say, Rabbi, those are the best high holidays I ever had. They said, because instead of getting up early and running to the shul and fighting for a parking place and arguing with we all gathered on the couch, me and my family, my kids. We wrapped everybody in a big talit. We turned you on the TV, and we really enjoyed, a couple of hours of high holiday meditation and prayer in a way without all the stress of the big public event. And that was one element of it. And the other element, of course, was that you could go shul hopping. Right? You weren't geographically bound or membership bound to a particular synagogue. You could go and listen to rabbis in New York or rabbis in Florida, even rabbis in Israel, and rabbis, cantors, teachers, communities all over the world. And that never left us. People still do that now, right?
Not only that, people feel like that's the real spirituality I was looking for. That's the meaning, because the idea is, I'm looking for the best sermon to inspire me. So I can change the channel to get inspired. And so then I feel like the high holidays were worth it. We didn't, right? Which is so sad, because it's sort of this I'm waiting for the rabbi to inspire me. And when I get inspired, then I fulfilled it, which was not at all what we grew up with. What we grew up with was You're obligated to the community. They're waiting for us, and we will be missed if we're not there.
Right. You're
Right.
not part of a community. And the idea that you can change channels, you can change synagogues the way you change channels on the TV or watch two at the same time, it's just, there's a loss of something. And on the other hand, there's a gain of something. And I have to respect the people who tell me, I really got a lot out of the holiday because I listened to all these different scholars and teachers around the world.
Well, you know what I think is interesting, Eddie, is there's not a pull to the synagogue like there once was.
Yeah.
And if we can get to the heart of that, like,
Mm.
is it that we're not as connected or feel as obligated to the community? Is it that we just enjoy all the choice that's out there and we don't want to limit ourselves to one choice?
Yeah.
Is it that it's a schlep, right? Getting dressed and parking. I mean, parking is never easy in LA, right? It's just not, right? Is like, what is at the core of that? It's now you can opt in or opt out. And is that necessarily a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. I'm mixed about it.
Right. You miss the community. Again, going as a kid, for all of the times I complained that it was boring, it was a time to regather with people I hadn't seen all year. It was a time to gather with friends, a time to gather with community. It was also, by the way, one of the other pieces which we talk about frequently is that you see where the empty seats are, people that we lost this year. And it was a time to remember them and to cherish them in their absence. And it was
you don't even know that now because you don't even know what the empty seats are.
Right.
We saw the empty seats was those are the people that have died this year. Now the empty seats are they went to a different shul, they're staying at home, they're on a hike. Like
they went to Hawaii. You're right.
Right? Like it's not that sense of obligation is not there. And I'm not sure that I'm a proponent of everybody get back to shul. That's the answer, right? That's not the answer. But I don't think there's something about gathering together, at least for a couple of days a year, to sort of see one another.
Right. So let's agree that gathering in person to hold each other and to see each other has a very powerful effect on life and on the holiday. It makes the holiday what it is, but that you're right, that there are certain things that I guess we're more critical in our consumption. That's the wrong word, but we're more critical in our expectations about what this should be. So let me ask you this question, which is a question that many, many Jewish people have this time of year, but are afraid, they're intimidated to ask their rabbi or ask a rabbi, which is, okay, so I'm going to come, Rabbi. I'm going to come to the synagogue. I'm going to sit in the pew or in the seat. Often synagogues are, expanded this time of year, so you might be far away from the.
And I know I'm going to be bored.
Well, you're getting two steps ahead of me.
Sorry.
And I'm going to hold in my hand an 800-page prayer book, most of which I don't really understand, or if I do understand it, I'm not sure I agree with it all. I'm going to listen to liturgy, listen to someone singing the prayers, which may be inspiring and uplifting and maybe not. I'm going to listen to the rabbi's words. How can I make this an experience that's worthwhile for myself, for my family, for my kids, for example? How do you survive my synagogue? Rabbi, tell me, Rabbi Hirsch.
Oh my God, if I had the answer to that, I would literally be God. But
give me some suggestions to get started. How do I survive my holidays and make it what it should be?
Right. I have some real suggestions, which is one, the prayer book is very difficult to access. The language can be very patriarchal, even though we've egalitarianized it, whatever that means. It's like Avinu Malkeinu is still our Father, our King, right? It's still our Father, our King. You want our God, you could, whatever. So I think one of the things that I used to do and still kind of do is beforehand during this month of Elul to go in and put little stickers like those yellow Post-its in places and thoughts that I want to meditate on. So maybe put a quote in there. So make the prayer book a workbook, right? Every quote you want to contemplate this year, throw it in the prayer book. Every sort of reading you want to think about, throw it in the prayer book. Post-it, you want to put it on there. Like start to interact with the prayer book. So when you're sitting there, you have a dialogue going on between you and what you, and honestly, you don't feel like you're wasting your time.
Right.
Right. I
That's
don't
one.
want to say it, but you don't feel like you're wasting your time. You're getting something out of it, because just sitting there watching as a spectator sport can feel very much like there's a million other things I could be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to criticize the question, because I do think that question is so valuable. And I so appreciate when somebody has the courage to really ask me. Usually they're too intimidated to really ask me. But just a caveat about the expectation. I tell you a silly story. I was given a gift certificate to a yoga class once. So I
My
went and took a
favorite.
yoga. I took a yoga. I've never done it in my life. And I have this very stiff, difficult, rigid Lithuanian body that my ancestors bequeathed me from the old country. And after the yoga class, I was miserable. I was in pain. I was a mess. And I went to the instructor and I said, this is nothing like what I hoped it would be. And he said, you can't come here once and expect its magic to happen. This, you have to start slowly. You have to put in some time. And the same thing happens with a prayer service. You can't just show up Yom Kippur and expect to be bowled over and moved, right?
It's also
That's not,
too much pressure on the rabbis.
well, that's a point. That's not prayer service. That's theater. And
That's
sometimes theater can do that. But even theater, you have to, I think preparing, I have a friend who does opera. He loves opera. So before he goes to the opera, he reads the libretto. He reads the summary of the story. He knows who the characters are. He knows something about how the music is constructed. So he's listening for certain things. He prepares himself. Preparing for these holidays is part of the process. It's strange to say this, of course, because we prepare for Passover. You start cleaning and shopping a month before Pesach, right? You prepare for Hanukkah. You buy presents for the kids. You start buying latke makings and stuff. What makes you think you prepare for Shabbos, certainly, right? What makes you think you don't need to prepare for the holiday? You prepare the self. You prepare what you're, as Rabbi Hirsch has told us, preparing your prayer book to be able to confront it. So if you're going to be moved, let's at least have the right expectation. If I want this to be that kind of experience, I need to start slowly, like my yoga instructor told me, go very slowly, stretching muscles that have never been stretched this way before, and arrive at the holidays ready to be touched. Please.
There's something you said that I'm sorry I kept interrupting, but
No,
this
okay.
expectation that I need to be inspired and moved is
Mm.
actually not the expectation that I think is accurate for the high holidays.
Mm.
The expectation at the high holidays is something will happen that will re-engage me, remind me that I'm a Jew. So something that happened for me, and I'll give you a perfect example. My first year at VBS, after I'd been a rabbi at Sinai, we became members at VBS. And we're sitting in the sanctuary, and I turn around, and the woman behind me looks a little sad. And I say to her, "Are you okay?" And she says, "No."
Mm.
That conversation started a friendship that is so deep today, who's one of my closest friends. And I met her. And so when I think about that high holidays, my expectation typically is, oh, I need to be inspired by the rabbi. But maybe the expectation is that you're just asking if someone's okay that hasn't been asked this year. Maybe your expectation is seeing someone, looking someone in the, like, maybe it's not about what you get, but it's about what you give. But we always hear that, right? Adam Grant's give and take, right? But even more than that, maybe the expectation is that something happens in the bathroom, right? Where you say to someone like, "Are you okay?" And that's your high holiday experience is supposed to be transformative. It's just not happening because the rabbi is giving some stirring moment that's supposed to change you, right? So I think it's a more expansive view of how am I going to be transformed by the holidays is not as limiting as I'm waiting for the rabbi to say something that lights my whole life.
Right. Well, consider this. Consider that the real activity of the holiday is not what goes on the bima of the stage of the synagogue, because that's very theatrical. Consider that what the holiday is about is what goes on inside of me. And the purpose of what goes on the bima is simply to ask me some questions, not even to ask me some questions, to suggest some questions that I need to ask myself, questions that I'm afraid to ask any other time of the year, truths that I'm afraid to confront any other time of the year, and that the environment of the synagogue has been designed, or it was once designed, put it this way, was once designed to give me the psychological safety to ask those questions. I'll give you what my best example of this, right? So the scariest prayer of the whole holiday is Una Tana Tokef, which is a meditation offered before the Musaf service, before the Kedusha of Musaf, late in the service in the morning. And that's the famous service, that's the prayer that begins with the words, on Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed, who will live and who will die, and who in their time and who before their time. And it just scares the hell out of all of us, because it is a prayer about something we just don't want to talk about. It is a prayer about mortality, about the fact that not one of us has an infinite number of tomorrows. So I'm sitting in synagogue, because as the rabbi, I sit there for a very long time. And I'm reading these words, and I realize that there's a series of questions. Mi yechia u'mi yamot. Who will live and who will die, and who in their time and who before their time, and who by fire and water and all. And then I realized that there's a simple answer to that question. The answer is me. I will live and I will die. And everyone lives enough time, and everyone dies before their time. And everyone faces fire, the fire of passion, and the water of drowning in the details and routines of life. And everyone is overcome by the stresses and difficulties, and everyone finds moments of peace. And the answer to those questions is me. And what this prayer is begging me to ask is, you only have a few moments in this universe. What are you doing with it? And it forces me to confront a truth which is the most controversial truth in all of human existence, which is the truth of my mortality, my limitations, my finitude. And I don't have an infinite number of tomorrows. What am I doing with it? What am I doing with it? And yes, much of it is beyond my control. I mean, who decides if they're going to be sick or they're going to die? And who decides if they're going to be well or be prosperous? These things are a lot out of our control, and yet we can control the character we have, the relationships we maintain, the giving we can do in the world, as you've said. So this, what happens in that prayer is it's asking us a question. It's actually suggesting to us to ask ourselves the question and trying to create an environment in which that question can be honestly confronted. You can't confront it every day of the year. We're too busy working in the world and raising families and contributing to the world and worrying about what goes on. But once a year, to sit quietly for a couple of hours and ask those questions can be very cleansing, can be very stirring.
You just said something so stirring and so beautiful. It made me think, like, what are all the questions that I want to put on Post-its, put in my Moxor, and contemplate over the course of the holidays? Like, what lies am I telling myself? I really think I have control. Who am I to think I'm so right? Maybe, am I wrong? Right? Is my marriage as difficult as I think it is, or as easy as I think it is? Right? Like, what are all those questions that live in our head all day long? What if we just wrote them down, every time you heard them, put them on a sticky, threw them in the book, and then said, the holidays, I'm going to wait to have an internal transformation. Can I use that time, not to let the bima stir me, but to let the questions inside of me transform me?
Yeah.
Beautiful, Eddie. Beautiful.
And that's, I think, my teacher, David Hartman, used to teach us that. He said, why do we have to say the confession 10 times on Yom Kippur? 10 times we're going to say, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. And he said, because by the third or fourth time you've gone through it so many times, it sort of washes over you. And it gives you an opportunity at that point to stop and say, what have I done this year? How have I wasted my time, my opportunities this year? How have I failed to live up to my own expectations of myself this year? The recitation the length of the service and the repetitiousness of the prayers is really a technique, a sort of a meditation technique to force us inside to confront the questions we really don't want to ask ourselves, the questions that are really difficult. How do I talk to my spouse and family? How do I work in the world? What have I given to the world?
Right. And
And
it
then,
goes
of
back
course,
to that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
go finish.
It just goes right back to Lahi Palel, right? Lahi Palel is not to pray, it's to pray to oneself, right? It's actually to self-reflect. And it goes back to that very basic thing, which we forget when we're sitting there waiting to be moved and stirred by the rabbi, as opposed to how am I going to stir my own soul?
Yeah.
This is a much more proactive, take agency, be your own rabbi type high holidays.
Yeah. You give the sermon. I'm tired of giving sermons. You
right?
give the right.
Right. You be the rabbi.
You be the rabbi.
Right. Because the truth of the matter is, I really believe that, Eddie. I believe everybody is their own rabbi. Right. The tradition teaches that God gives us everything we ought to know. And then as we're pushed through however you get into the world, right? God pushes on that filtrum. And what happens is we forget it. And then we find teachers to reteach us everything. We're supposed to be our own rabbis. We're the smartest person in the room if we're willing to listen. It's like the rabbi isn't. No offense.
No, and then I want to go one more step. My dear teacher, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who had a very powerful idea of God that was very controversial because he didn't believe in the God above. He really believed in a God within. The God within, and that the purpose of prayer was to reach the God within that center of power within each one of us to become the people we're meant to be, that we should be. And so he taught a beautiful teaching. He said, whenever you say a prayer, a bracha, or whenever you have a petitionary prayer, dear God, help me with, add 2 words to your prayer, through me. Through me, right? So, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed is God who brings bread from the earth through me. Blessed is God who brings healing to the sick through me. Blessed is God who blesses the people Israel with peace through me. Because in adding those 2 words at the end of every prayer, what happens then is you move it from, God, do it for me, to a God, help me do what it is that I'm supposed to do. And our prayers then become ethical commandments, become statements of personal responsibility.
But it's so funny because this takes us back to where we started, which is the way we went to synagogue was passive.
Right.
And we're asking ourselves and everyone to change this methodology, go from being a passive participant to being an agent, to being an active one. That's very different high holidays, right? And so if you want to be active, you got to get up and move, like wherever you're going. And that maybe is one of the answers to this question. I want to be in a community with other people who want agency in their Judaism. And the reason I go on my high holidays is to be a part of a community with people who are also interested in being active agents.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I go to VBS.
Well,
this isn't a promo. This isn't a promo.
But
I go to VBS because I know that when I'm there, I'm going to see other people that are actively trying to be agents in their Judaism.
Yeah.
I was at Shul last week, and then I was at the Nova Experience and ran into like congregants at VBS. And I thought, of course I did.
Yeah. A lot of people.
Of course I did.
My argument with contemporary synagogue architecture is that it enforces that passivity you mentioned, right? Because we build synagogues on the model of theaters. And what a model of a theater is, you sit quietly here in the dark, and the actors on the stage will engage in the drama. So that truth is up there on the stage, and the idea is that it'll sort of filter down here into the audience, and you're a consumer, a passive consumer. You're imbibing the truth that is cast down from on high. or down from the bima. And that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? The great, beautiful artist Yaakov Agam, the brilliant Israeli artist, he makes these wonderful pictures that change as you walk by them. And he was once interviewed by someone who didn't know a lot about his art, and they asked him, why on earth do you make pictures like this? They're on these very interesting kind of planes, so that as you walk by, the picture changes. And he said, because I want you as the spectator, the viewer, to become an active participant in the construction of the beauty of this piece. And so by choosing where you're going to stand in front of the piece, as you walk past the piece, in choosing your perspective, you're choosing a construction of truth and joining me as a partner in the construction of truth. I think that's a beautiful model of how we should approach these holidays in synagogue. You are my partner in constructing a moment for both of us.
Right. And the obvious is, if you were going to give the sermon this year, what sermon would you give? Right. We've never asked congregants, be a rabbi. What's your sermon this year? Not what do you want me to talk about? Because we get a lot of advice, right? I know, Rabbi, are you going to talk about Israel? Rabbi, are you going to talk about the situation? Rabbi,
or better, Sherry, it's better, Rabbi, don't talk about.
Oh, right, I forgot.
Don't talk about Israel. Don't talk about. That's what I really love.
I forgot. I completely forgot.
So then I say, what should I talk about? Judaism,
Where there's the assay and the lota assay, right? There's what you do, and then there's what you don't do. I completely forgot. There's so many more don't do's than do's. But I think it's a really powerful question to say, if you were giving the sermon this year, what would you talk about? And it's not as simple as I would talk about Israel.
Yeah. And the other piece I'll add to is, a friend of mine told me a story about, he was on a spiritual retreat with a group of other Jewish leaders and Jewish teachers. And the guy who was supposed to bring the milk crate full of prayer books left it at home in his garage. So they arrived, 4 or 5 hours up into the mountains, some remote place, and it was Shabbat, and their time to pray Kabbalat Shabbat, the evening service of Shabbat. And the poor guy says, oh my God, we have no prayer books. And the leader of the retreat did something so beautiful and wise. He said, this is an invitation. Let's consider this not a mistake, but an invitation. We don't have to sing the words in the book. We can sing and pray and think and meditate what's in our heart. So what would happen if, after I've done the work you mentioned, which is my stickums, my sticky notes, my Post-it notes, I just close the Machzor and think deeply about my life, where I am, and think about what needs to be thought about, what needs to be confronted at this time of year, in this very, very fraught and difficult and special year.
Yeah, it is a fraught year. There are a lot of questions, right? If there's ever a time to carve out a couple hours to actually just pause and think with other people in the room that may not think exactly like you, but they're part of your tribe. They're part of your people. You're not looking over your shoulder to see if you're okay. You're okay. To actually be in that space, to me, is a compelling reason this year for myself to come to synagogue.
So one more question. Ready, Rabbi? One more question. Talked about
I'm ready.
how to survive synagogue and the way we would like to do it. Some of us have a custom, and I'll confess that this is mine as well, of bringing a book to the synagogue. That is, I want to be respectful to the service around me, so I will stand up and sit down when the rabbi asks me to do so. And I will say the major prayers of the holiday. I'll certainly say Shema and Ve'ahavta and Amidah. But for the rest of the service, which is hours and hours long, I prefer to read a book rather than to listen to what's around me. I find it more engaging. The question is, what book? I have some suggestions, but I want yours. What book?
No, you start with yours, because we're reading a lot. We've been talking and we've been reading a lot of the same thing. So I want to hear yours first. I don't want to steal your thunder, and then I'll add.
No. This is important. I'll give you three. I'll give you an ancient one, an older one, and a new one. Okay. The ancient book I think that I would recommend people bring is Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. which is part of the Tanakh, part of the Bible. We do read it on Sukkot, so you'll just get a head start. He's the fellow who gave the Pete Seeger and the birds to everything there is a season. And what he's trying to figure out is the great question of life, the greatest question of life, which is, how do I find meaning in a world which is so jumbled? And how do I find meaning in a life which is finite? And I think that it's wonderful, the answers he comes to and the answers he misses. And every time I read Kohelet, I engage in an argument with the fellow. And it's such a remarkable book. That's a new one, an old one rather.
An old one.
One of the classic ones is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which they retitled The Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl, of course, was a Viennese psychiatrist brought to Auschwitz, put in the slave labor camp at Auschwitz, and spent his years in Auschwitz and the rest of his life trying to figure out why some people got through that horror and that hell and seemed to be psychologically intact, and others were crushed by it. And his notion, it's called logotherapy, is that you cannot control the conditions of your existence, but you can always tell a story to yourself about what it means. And you find meaning and purpose. And if someone has a why, they can endure anyhow. And it's a brilliant meditation on the human condition with some stunning, stunning stories in it. That's the older one. And the brand new one that I just got in the mail is my teacher and friend Yitz Greenberg has finally put his principal teaching into a book called The Triumph of Life. It's available on Amazon from JPS, a Jewish Publication Society. And I've been learning with Yitz for 45 years. He is one of the deepest, wisest, kindest human beings I've ever met in my life. And his Torah, his teaching is so worthy of spending a year learning, but starting with this high holiday, The Triumph of Life, Rabbi Irving Greenberg. Those are my three suggestions. And yours?
Well, that's why I'm glad we started with you, because you and I both know that The Triumph of Life, I was reading it like the day it came out from cover to cover. And I also just received Elliot Cosgrove's new book, which we just talked about, which is For Such a Time Like This, but I haven't read it. So I don't know, but I
read it. It's Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of the Park Avenue Synagogue. He grew up at Sinai Temple with you. And he and a wonderful, deep soul. And it's a set of his reflections on this last year. He wrote it for this year. And he does a beautiful job of gathering in all of our feelings and our frustrations and our dreams and our hopes. If you get the book, it's wonderful. I suggest the last two chapters. The second to the last chapter, he's talking to a guest at his Shabbos table who's his daughter's best friend, who says to him, why should a person like me love Israel? And the last chapter is his own conversation with his child about why Israel matters. And I think it's a beautiful, those two chapters alone, but the whole book is a beautiful reflection on this past year that we've all suffered through. Please.
So that I think is interesting. I love everything that Erica Brown writes, and I think it's very accessible. So I think she has a lot of books. They're current. They've got a little bit of business touch to them, but I think they're very accessible, and you can read it, then go back to the prayer book, read it, go back to the prayer book. Like Shai Held has a new book out, you as I know, which is about love.
Yeah, Judaism.
But you got to study. You got to be ready to study. You can't. But the other thing I was just going to say is Yitz Greenberg, who you and I both love, wrote a book called Sage Advice. I love bringing it to shul because what he does is he gives little comments on each Mishnah. Now, whether you know the Mishnah or not, you can read the Mishnah and get like a burst of inspiration. And what I like about it is it kind of, that inspiration then transfers to the prayer book itself. So I like it. It's snippets of sparks.
Right.
So those are there's so many books that I love and that I read, but those are the ones that I would bring to synagogue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sherry. We will
Pleasure.
continue our conversation next week with more wisdom, guidance, and advice about how we make these holidays so very special. But until then, thank you, Sherry. Shabbat Shalom, and to everyone. And as the new year comes close, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.